sessions, you are familiar with what a challenge is. Some of this may be repeat, but the idea is to kind of really take a look at what the setup looks like, make sure that you guys understand different ways that you can use the system currently to set up different types of challenges and kind of get you thinking about how you might be able to come up with something that's really unique on your own. As noted, we are Eric and Johanna. Quick topics today. Why are you going to do a challenge? The nuts and bolts of challenge setup. This is the part that is pretty straightforward. If you're familiar with challenge setups, it may be repetitive for you, but a lot of the time that when we're going through information on these, we hear that it's just a lot going on really quickly. So we wanted to break this down in really clear, concise steps. So when you go back to set up your challenges, you have something to refer back to really understand what each setting is that you're looking at. This is not a correct list. We are going to go crazy then, and Eric is going to take it away with creative challenges, and then the rest of it is a different presentation that we will not do. Why do you want to start a challenge? The basic reason that we have kind of pulled from the industry is that a lot of races right now, whether they're doing something virtual that's tied to their regular race or they're just canceled, they are kind of on the sidelines. Their runners haven't heard from them. They are worried about how they're going to engage people again in the future. And a challenge is something that you can do that doesn't feel like a contrived virtual race, but really allows your race organization to stay relevant in your community, to connect with runners, to keep people thinking about what you're doing so that when you come back to real races, you're still on people's minds and they still feel like they've had an interaction with you. Again, stay engaged. It also is a good way to create goodwill. Challenges can often be a little bit more personal than a race, especially if you have something like a Facebook group that's running where you're interacting directly with your participants on a longer term. It makes them feel more like they are a part of your organization and not just someone who shows up on race day, and that can extend again to your in-person races when you start having them again. Expanding your community. Hopefully by the time we get around to doing race trends this year, we'll have a lot more data on this, but even just cursory looks at what virtual runners look like and challenge runners look like that is different from a normal race. So it's not necessarily all the same demographic. You aren't necessarily pulling all of your existing runners. You're also able to appeal to a lot of newer runners and a lot of people who don't live in your area but might like the causes that you support. So it gives you a chance to really expand who is involved with you and reach out to new people who may be interested in your organization. Reduces the reliance on in-person. Most of the time, when we go back to normal, your events will go on, but there are situations that come up, like a hurricane or a weather event, or we do see events that get canceled for reasons out of a race's control. And having the ability to have an event that runs as a challenge that is there no matter what happens in terms of short-term problems gives you a little bit of revenue that's coming in even if something happens to your races. And that means continuing to do challenges even once you're able to do races and having them as an added service for you. This doesn't necessarily have to be what you're doing instead of a race. Like you said, it's something that we really think will continue beyond the end of coronavirus crisis, because we really think people are enjoying the opportunity to do something longer term, and that will carry over and continue even once races come back. There's kind of room for both, especially when you see challenges as something that can be a good training program for real races. So this is the kind of boring part, but it's a good look at what you're going to see on your dashboard when you first go in to set up a challenge. We also have this link at the end, runsignup.com/challenge platform. This has been updated relatively regularly. There's a lot of good resources there. Matt Sinclair has been putting out videos to help walk through things. You can also find samples that of races that we created that are pretend races that you can actually just register for if you want to see how the challenge registration and results submission goes. And you can look at real live challenges that are up currently and see what other people are doing. Couple of reminders. These are things that apply to any virtual race, but they're really important. Just, you can save yourself some time by having them done ahead of time and making sure that you're setting up your race carefully. In your race wizard, your race type has to be set to virtual. The rest, some of the settings will not show up if that is not set correctly to virtual. When you're setting up your race address, you can make your address right in the wizard as something like anywhere, everywhere, etc. You are still going to have to enter a valid city and zip code there. We get a lot of questions about that because people, don't want that to show up and they're worried that they're tied to that location in, say, Oklahoma. You can enter in whatever city and zip code is correct there, but then you can hide it later. If you go to the race page location there, there's some options there to hide the location, and you can instead add something custom, wherever you are, run anywhere type language. Customizing your confirmation email. This is just a really simple way to make sure that you're really clear about how your event will run. I think it's always important, but it's maybe even more important with something like a challenge that is unfamiliar to a lot of people. They're going to want to look for a lot of information, so you want to have that really available in many different forms. Just putting information, links to where they can find the challenge submission information, any sort of information about what their expectations are. Giveaway description. I think Brian yesterday brought this up. It's a cool little thing that I think no one would have noticed. It's actually really helpful. So when you're setting up your giveaway, if you are planning on shipping things or if there's a specific packet pickup, etc., you want to update that so that you have the correct, so that people know when to expect their giveaway to be coming to them and they are prepared for that. Changing the race verbiage, you can actually just change the language there so that your race says challenge instead of race. It's a small thing, but it can save some confusion when people come to your page. This list and a bunch of other things that are just general for virtual races can also be found on the RunSignup /go virtual. That's where general go virtual type information is. So enabling your enhanced features. Now that you have your race set up as a virtual race, you've selected the virtual race type, you can go to Race Day Tools, Enhanced Virtual Race, and Set Up Virtual Race. And you're going to come to what we can loosely describe as your virtual race dashboard. Initially, it's just going to have one button that says Enable Enhanced Features. Once you go through the steps to enable that, then you're going to get this menu on the bottom that has essentially 4 different buckets of features that you can go to and update. If you don't see that Enable Enhanced Features button, then your race set type was not set as virtual. So you'll want to go back to the race wizard, set that as virtual, and then you'll have that option to start setting this up. Sorry, I think I skipped. All right. First things that you're going to do, create a message that your participants will see during registration. This is your chance to just really quickly explain to your registrants when they're registering exactly a little quick message about how this will work. I wouldn't make it paragraphs long because they won't read it during registration, but something quick to say, you want to set up this, this is how you're going to log your information each day. That will show up then when they're registering so that they get another reminder that there is a way that they're going to be able to report the results. The time range that you want to collect results, this is how long your challenge lasts for. So, if it's a July challenge, July 1st to July 31st, pretty simple. The results set, again, for most challenges, this is going to be pretty straightforward. Alternate events is something you wouldn't really use for a lot of challenges. So you're usually just going to be creating a new result set and naming it for the challenge. If you are planning on doing teams, which Eric will touch on a little bit later, you do want to enable teams during this step. To do a challenge, this step is important. You do have to enable that multiple activities for a challenge button over there. The reason that that matters is essentially what that means is if you don't enable that, you can only put in one time or one activity that's done. You could say you've completed a 5K, but you wouldn't be able to come back the next day and do another one, even if the time range was longer. So you need to enable for people to put in multiple distances. or tallies or whatever it is that you're doing. So activity types, this is taking you out of that enhanced menu and taking you over into the next little button, which is activity types. Essentially, if you're doing only a running challenge with the ability to enter that over multiple days, you only have one activity to set up. If you are setting up a multi-sport challenge, then you're going to want to have different types of activities. So you'll fill this out multiple times then for each activity. What you can do here is set up whether or not it's showing a tally. You can allow people to enter a time with it or not. You can also name it however you want. So at this activity type up here, there are generic defaults that you can put in there, but you can also put that as custom. So if your activity type is something like a push-up, then you can use custom and then you just rename it over here on activity type. On the next button area, the messaging, text messages do not work for challenges. They're over too long of a time range for that to make sense. So you don't have to worry about that. This page is going to be automatically created. There's a page that goes up with directions, general generic directions for how you log miles. You can just use the default page as is, or if you have other information, you can add that as a link to that page or video to that page. You can redirect to a different page entirely. If you do that, I would make sure that your directions are really stellar and extremely clear about how people are logging their results, because this is a place, information that people are going to get. This page gets sent out using that replacement tag there to every person who is registered for your race, to tell them where and how to log their miles. So you want to make sure that that page is accurate if you're making any changes to it. You set up your own emails then to go out. There are auto setup ones that are basically just, it's race day and here's how to log your miles. I would recommend that you expand on that a little bit, thank them for the event, make it a little bit more personal, but keep that information, the replacement tags up near the top so it's easy for them to get to the information if they want. You can fill in as much as you want here of other details about your race. This button area, the goals, is kind of the fun stuff. I think that's what really makes challenges different, is having goals. So you can toggle this so that all participants have the same kind of goal. Everyone is supposed to make it to 100 miles, or you can toggle it off and say, it's up to each participant to set their own goal. Either way, the participants will get a little goal progress bar if you enable that, so they'll be able to see where they are along their own goal, whether it's a universal one or not. The other option here that I think people have seen on a bunch of the examples is a map. So if you have a route, if you're running across one of the states, or if you are doing, a windy route through your city, you can upload that map and then people can see exactly where they are. If you do that, have a little bit of fun with it. Make sure that people know that that map is there. It's just like it's run from Google Maps. So they can actually take the little person on Google Maps and drop it on the map where they are and kind of have a view of what they'd be seeing right now. It's a fun way to remind people that this is a vacation or an adventure, and they should check out every so often where they are. And I've actually seen on a lot of Facebook groups, people sharing the screenshot from their Google Maps to say, hey, look, I'm standing in front of this cool statue today. And people can have fun with that. Just quickly, we get a lot of questions about how to create a map. There's a million ways to do it. This is by no means the only ones. You can use Google Maps through google.com/mymaps, or you can use mapmyrun.com. Both of those have builders where you can set out the course yourself. And then I have on here where you can find the downloads. So you download those KML files, and that's what you upload into the maps section to create your maps. And now, more fun. Eric, let me, sorry.
So we're going to discuss, I think, about 5 different types of challenges. I've actually dreamed up even more since we put the deck together. So if you have questions or thoughts on, hey, is this possible? The likelihood is that it is very possible. One of the things that I do want to highlight that I don't know if I've heard anyone discuss is that there's actually a distinct difference between the registration process and the challenge results. So you can have multiple events that use the same result set in our setup. So if you do want to have different pricing because of the different swag that you're offering, that is one scenario. So now I'm going to jump into challenges for triathlons. So most triathlons obviously can't happen right now. The swim leg is even a bit of an issue for a virtual challenge because a lot of pools are closed. So what we have seen a fair amount of them do is switch to a virtual duathlon. A good example of that would be the New York City Triathlon is switched to a duathlon, and they are using our challenge platform to do that. So to implement, let's see if I can actually. All right. To implement that, you're going to actually set up multiple activities for each leg of the challenge. So in the case of a duathlon or a triathlon, a duathlon, you would set up individual bike leg, and you would likely want to, or an individual run leg first, and you would set up a total tally, which would be the amount of miles or kilometers that they are supposed to travel for that leg. And then you would be collecting time as well, because in a triathlon, it's a fixed distance with time being the shortest to rank to the highest. So in this case, you're going to set up a run, a bike, and a run for a duathlon. You can set up a swim, bike, and a run if you believe that there are enough pools available in your area. So that hopefully will give you an idea of how to do that. Once you have done that, obviously you want to collect time entry, as I specifically stated. A lot of triathlons will also want to show activity totals. And lastly, you're going to want to set a limit of 1 per each activity type. So in that case, they're not logging the first leg of the run twice, but instead they're only able to log it once. We do support the ability to edit that. So if you're going to allow them to do redos of their times, they would be able to do that and effectively go back in and edit their times without going over that 1 limit. Virtual challenges. So probably the biggest one on our platform right now is the Leadville Challenge, and it's a 100,000-foot challenge that they launched. So with it, we do support any type of activity. And in most cases, you're going to be collecting just the vertical elevation gain, but you can collect miles, elevation, and time. So when you're enabling the elevation gain, that is right below the times, you want to select that as the primary source of input and allow them to input that. And then below, how should results be sorted? You'll want to do elevation gain with time as the tiebreaker. So you can go check out the 100,000-foot challenge from Leadville as an example. Oops, sorry, jumped too fast. And with that, let's see if we can go back. Where did we go? Trying to go back 2 slides. Let's see. Sorry about that. We are about 500 miles apart between the two of us. So me trying to control Johanna's screen is not exactly perfect. So pardon the technical difficulties. Well, I guess we'll move forward with teams. So the vertical challenge last piece that I actually would like to make a comment about is you do want to enable the elevation gain goal instead of the distance goal when you're setting that up. So that will allow them to see how much elevation they have accumulated versus the miles that they've accumulated in case you are logging multiple miles and elevation. So challenges for teams. We have a handful of different events that are using challenges for teams. The one off the top of my head that is using it, besides for the vertical one that I just mentioned from Leadville, a good example of one that has team scoring already enabled is the Race Across Maryland. So if you want to go check that out with Corrigan Sports, that one has enabled teams, and they have different distances, and then they enabled the team results. The enabling of team results is really cool and really simple. So as soon as you enable team results, it starts to put together a results interface with the accumulated tallies of miles or elevation gain for those individuals, rolls that up to the team. So then you have a team result set that displays for those teams. So here's an example of that. So you can actually see their clock time, the team name, and the total miles in this case. You can click on that team name, and it'll then further break down the teams by the individuals on the team and sort them by the person that likely has the most miles, because that in this case would be the goal of this one race. You can sort it by the other fields as well. So a lap race. We don't, off the top of my head, I don't know of anyone that has done a lap race. The 500 challenge was going to do a lap race, but decided that they wanted to do miles because not everyone knew that the ND 500 course is 2.5 miles. So there was a little bit of confusion on that. So they switched to a miles only, but we're going to run you through an example of how a lap race works. So the idea is pretty simple. Instead of calculating total miles, you know, you have a fixed course, let's say a 400-meter lap at a track. And in that case, people are going to go out to their local tracks and run, and you will be able to accumulate those laps. So with that setup, you're going to check off, obviously, times. You're going to say distance completed, and then how many meters is in an individual lap. And then the tally type, you're going to select number of laps, and you can leave it as a number of laps, or you can decide to rename it any way you want. And then from there, they can actually go in and when they're logging, it'll show them the number of laps, and they can actually put in the distance. So this is an example. You can put in a KML file of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway as an example, and that is 2.5 miles around. With this, it's just going to drop a pin on the lap of where they are, because they're not doing fractional laps most of the time. So it's just going to put it at the start of where you drew your line. In this case, I drew this line, and the finish line is actually right above the I in Brickyard. So it's a little off. So if you're concerned, you might want to make sure you do your lap at the start finish line of the actual track. Overall tally. So this is a pretty common one. We now have the Million Miles for Justice. We also had the determination crosses the country as another example. With that, what we're doing is accumulating total miles for all the participants. It's not about individuals. So in the case of both of those, they were trying to accumulate miles as a group. With that, we built a really cool cover page feature that is a virtual challenge. So you go into race page, cover page, and you add a virtual challenge. So once you've done that, you set up the overall goal, which is the goal for the event. And in this case, it's 1 million miles. For the determination one across the country, I believe they set it at about 3,500 miles. And at that point, you upload an image for the background, and you can add additional title and description as well. And with it, you get a really cool widget that's added to the homepage. And as you can see, with Determination Runs Across the Country, they completed the country 3 times and also had additional miles. So that gives you a total progress towards the miles that they're trying to hit, the goals. Here is the actual setup for that. So even when the main goal is collected, individuals are still able to do their own goals. So you can still offer them to hit their own goal, which could be 100 miles towards that 1 million mile march, or you can let them define their own goals. And when they define their own goals, they are able to go in and adjust it at a later date, similar to fundraising goals. So they can go in and say, you know what, I already hit 100 miles. I'm going to up that to 150 and keep them motivated. So the overall tally and overall goal, this is the basic look and feel of it. So you can actually allow your actual virtual challenge to accumulate totals, to show the tallies for different activities without showing one overall goal. Use the data component on the cover page. And there are some workarounds to that as well. So, and feel free to ask any questions as well if you have any questions. So one of the things that I'm most intrigued with the challenge platform that I believe pivots towards the future more is fitness challenges. So while we're doing a lot of virtual challenges that are focused on elevation and miles, I believe fitness challenges pivot really well into almost every organization's future. So with a fitness challenge, it isn't always going to be getting to 100 miles. It's more of a daily workout, but it can be just about anything. So there's the ability to set this up is defined by your limits of imagination. So there are tons of different ones. I had a great conversation with Go St. Louis yesterday, and I'm going to give you an example of what they might be using it for this fall. Before I do that, I want to run you through an example of how you would do this. So you would enable show for activity field, and that would tally. And then at that point, you can add a max tally if you do want to have limits. And then you're going to enable time entry. Could be required. It may not be required. So this is an example of 50 push-ups, 30 pull-ups, 50 burpees, and 100 air squats. So for their activity challenge, they want to do by time. And this would be more in line with a CrossFit challenge, if you will. So they're doing required time. The example that I'm going to give you in a minute, it would not be required by time. So then they're going to show their splits. So with that, it's going to show a split in the results that would show for the push-ups, the pull-ups, the burpees, and the 100 air squats. And in their case, they're doing 100 or one limit per. And it's very similar to a triathlon. So therefore, someone can only do 50 push-ups one time, and they're going to record the time. All right, so fitness challenge scenario number 2 is complete as many push-ups, pull-ups, burpees, and air squats over a 2-week window. And in this scenario, you would do a check of the activity tally. You do a tiebreaker for the actual entry for time. So you can do required, and therefore every time they do a push-up or set of push-ups, they are basically recording their number of push-ups and the amount of time it took them to do that. And then lastly, then you're gonna also want to put those splits in. So you're gonna check off show splits for activity totals. And then lastly, you would only require that they do each of those one time. So therefore they are required to do at least one push-up, one pull-up, one burpee in this case. So I'm going to actually pivot right back to the previous slide real quick and give you a really common world example for most of your race organizations that I'm actually seeing this taking place. So Go St. Louis called me yesterday and said, hey, we have this kid challenge. And the kid challenge is pretty cool. They require every kid to do 26 books of reading. They do 26 good deeds, so rights, and then they run 26 miles. In this case, this is pretty much the setup. They want every kid to do 3 different things. They don't necessarily need time, so they could say, yes, we want to show a tally for that. So then you're collecting books, you're collecting good deeds, and you're collecting the miles run. And then you don't necessarily need a time. You can allow it as an optional for the activity type of the miles. And then you do want to show the total so each kid can see how many books they've read, good deeds they've done, and miles they've run. And then you're going to at least require one activity of each. And with that, every kid can go in and log their miles. In their case, they have roughly 5,000 kids that do this every year, and they finish at their actual Go St. Louis Marathon in the spring. So they're going to implement this as a challenge solution to get all their kids and all their schools implementing a challenge for their kid program. So that's a great example of how to use a fitness challenge using our challenge platform in a real world scenario, not a virtual challenge. So we'd recommend keep learning, always keep learning. There's tons of solutions that we've implemented. Here are our basic solutions that I would recommend, or educational options right now. The challenge platform URL that you see above. There are plenty of video tutorials that Matt has recorded on how to use this. The challenge platform is changing daily, so we are implementing a ton of new features. Matter of fact, about 30 minutes before we jumped on this session, Stephen released team scoring with individual tallies on the team results page. So you could jump on that Leadville 100,000 foot challenge, and you would drill into each team member and see how many miles they've accumulated and how many feet and elevation they've accumulated. We also have lots of live examples to look at on this page as well. So let's run through the questions, since we have roughly 30 minutes to do that.